day.
The Expansion Zone with Sonia Barrett.
Everybody's talking about consciousness. Everybody wants that eternal kiss. Yeah, everyone's saying there's more than this. Everyone wants to follow their own bliss. Talking about one love, one blood, one light in everyone. One life, give each other. We are sisters and brothers. We sing Om Shanti.
On the Expansion Zone, we examine life and our quest to understand who and what we are and of the vastness of human potentials. We explore the making of our world from quantum physics to parapsychology, health, sociology, and philosophy, along with practical living. You are reminded of the possibilities in creating personal change. So for an hour, we'll stimulate and expand the mind.
Om Shanti, 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 Shanti. Sing the word. Let's do it together. Shanti, 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 Shanti. It's time to wake up. Shanti, Shanti, to a brighter day. Realize that. Shanti, Shanti, love is
Welcome to the Expansion Zone with Sonia Barrett. I'm, of course, Sonia Barrett. Thank you once again for tuning in. The intro song, of course, is by the talented Donna DeLore, and it's called Be the Change. Now, today we have some real cutting-edge dialogue that's going to be going on. And this is the age that we're in. And so this is what the Expansion Zone is about, is expanding the mind and bringing you information that might be outside of the norm for you, perhaps. And so let's see. There's one thing that human beings desire pretty much over most all things, and that is to live. I think most people will agree with that. We want to live. When all is said and done, we want to live. We want to beat time. So, and this happens to be the age-old question and the age-old quest. Remaining youthful without encountering the grips of old age and perhaps living hundreds of years or thousands of years. And some might say this is far-fetched, but no, not anymore. And I think you can see in our world that many things that were considered far-fetched at one time, that is no longer the case. So we keep stepping it up and pushing the envelope and being investigative and being curious and allowing ourselves to see what the possibilities are. And that's why my guest today is going to be Dr. Janni Lloyd. Let's find out a little bit about her. Well, for the first time, hundreds of thousands of people are seeing beyond the finite barrier created by the belief physical death is inevitable, breaking through into future possibilities that are without limits. People with many different worldviews, holistic, spiritual, scientific, multidimensional, and those who simply love life are coming together to own the right to live indefinitely in full health. They are creating a new philosophy, one of peace, love, cooperation, joy, inclusiveness, and gratitude for the gift of life. Dr. Janni Lloyd's interest in health began in 1973 when she commenced her medical degree at the University of Western Australia. With a special interest in the psyche and emotions, she later moved into holistic health. In 1992, she began studying and living healthy longevity, indefinite life extension, and the philosophy of physical immortality from many different perspectives: psychology, spirituality, holistic health, and medical science. Her main purpose is to bring wisdom streams together to facilitate awareness of this potential for all. Janni writes books, conducts talks, and mediates online groups on this topic. Her most recent ebook is Healthy Longevity Philosophy Through the Finite Barrier. And I got to tell you, you want to check it out. But in the meantime, let's bring her in. Dr. Janni Lloyd, welcome to the Expansion Zone.
Hi, Sonia. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's been such a long time since I've heard your voice, since we've talked.
Yeah, it's really cool.
You're doing so much, and it's very exciting to have you here to discuss this topic. So I think we should start out by perhaps finding out from you, before we go diving in, but finding out from you, what was it back then? You know, you went to school to be a doctor. What happened? Is there any particular thing that happened in your life or observations that began to take place for you that made you say, you know what? I wonder if this is possible.
Yeah, it was I always liked, what I was learning and giving, and, I was always about expansion. I was always about helping people to see who they really were in the sense of what their potential was. And of course, it started off in a fairly ordinary sort of way, and looking at their lifestyle and what their beliefs were about themselves and so on. So that my interest in that grew as a general practitioner, because I could see what effect it had on people's health. So my own journey took me into psychology and meditation, and I had been meditating for close to a year in 1992, and I had an epiphany around this, that perhaps physical death is a choice, and that we need to balance our yin-yang, or fuse the opposites within our being, and then we would be able to realise this potential, and that humanity was ready to take that journey as well. So that was quite an interesting epiphany to have when I was a medical practitioner. So it took a year or two, and then I led myself, or, found Soma Therapy, which was more holistic and more spiritual, but also had a strong psychological and lifestyle understanding involved in it as well. So that then led me further, and my own journey unfolded. So, yeah, it's really been... Although there was a moment where I had a realisation beyond that finite barrier, it still has been, in some ways one step at a time, at putting all the pieces together within my own life, and all those logical bits and pieces starting to come together. And of course, the medical profession now are talking a lot about this potential. Indefinite life extension and healthy longevity are real popular topics now, and even Google has a project going on to move beyond death. So yeah, it's an exciting time.
Absolutely. Now, it has to be, really, to say the least, very exciting for you to see that where you were back then, I mean, starting out in that thought process, because I was, with you then. Also, a lot of changes happened for me in 1992 as well. But to see where you were in that thought process, and to see it all sort of unfolding now, where it's becoming a little bit more common dialogue and not something so bizarre in terms of, people even examining this as a possibility. So that has to be exciting.
It is, yeah. And a lot of that is to do with languaging and, what people are schooled in, what their understandings are. And when I first awoke, it was really mainly the spiritual traditions that spoke of physical immortality philosophy. And there was no words like indefinite life extension. And there was no words like really healthy longevity. It was just longevity. And you didn't really think healthy in the context of longevity back then so much. So it's sort of like these language bridges have started to develop. And so it's, when you really consider it too, the quest of all health professionals has been ultimate health for everybody. It has to be. When you get down to the bottom line, we all want ongoing health. And I think that's, as the filters of perception clear, you see that that's everybody's reality. But if they're stuck in the finite belief of physical death is inevitable, that gets clouded over and lost. So the enthusiasm of the child and the enthusiasm of what you go into these professions for can get lost. So yeah, it really is very exciting. And we also have now a lot of medical studies that are coming together in a wonderful symphonic culmination to actually really logically support all of these potentials.
That was my next question and comment, is that there is so much that's supporting this information at this time. And of course, we've heard over the years, the body renews itself every 7 years. But I think it became almost like a little bit of a mantra for some people. They would say that, but not really clearly understand the process of this cycle of repair. And if you want to touch on that, a bit, because obviously the evidence of this being possible is also tied into the fact that the body is already doing the things that it needs to do that would actually support what we're speaking about, which is longevity and age.
Healthy longevity.
Healthy longevity, I should say.
Yes, yeah. So now so the first thing for people to understand is that their body is incredibly complex and miraculous. Absolutely no doubt. And really, I think as far as the logical understanding, we're still scratching the surface of what we know about our bodies. However, over the 45 years that I've been involved in it, we know a whole lot more than we did then when I went into medical school. Things like stem cells we didn't know about, that they could replace cells. So, things like neurons, we thought we only had a set of neurons and that was it. We didn't know about neuroplasticity, that the brain is able to continually grow and change. The list goes on and on. Epigenetics is another really interesting area that's the control above the gene. So, way back we thought genes controlled everything. They don't. Your epigenome is very important, and that is very dependent on lifestyle and things like positive cognition, what your lifestyle choices are to, keep fit and exercise and nutrition. So epigenetics is a really exciting and important area. And another area, the telomere, is really exciting. So we have Elizabeth Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize for that back in, I think it was about 2009, around that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they discovered that the telomere, which is the little cap at the top of the chromosome, and it's a little bit like the cap at the top of the shoelace, and if your cap at the top of the shoelace gets too short, your shoelace frays. And if that happens with the chromosome, it cannot be replicated. The RNA that goes, I think it's the RNA, that goes up to read the chromosome information cannot read it correctly. So therefore your cell breaks down. So the telomere and telomerase have been found to be very important. And Elizabeth Blackburn and Alyssa Appel brought out a book recently called The Telomere Effect, and they've done so many studies. Alyssa Appel is a head of, I think it's psychiatry at UCSF. So there's many, many studies about, once again, our psychology and community involvement, positive cognition, all of these things, and how they keep your telomere long. So if you keep your telomere long, then you don't seem to age as rapidly. So that's just some of them. I tell you, it is vast. This subject is vast, Sonia.
It is very, very vast. And, of course, I've been at this for years as well. So it's fascinating to me as well to hear more people embracing that idea. When I came out with my book in 2007, 2008, It was for a lot of people very, very cutting edge. And strangely enough, I think when you and I did the interview the very last time a few years back, I was expressing the fact that I came into the planet. I was born really questioning this. So it's not for me something that I suddenly started questioning. It always seemed a little bizarre to me. It was always just a little bit bizarre. And I thought, geez, how come nobody thinks this is weird? So this is exciting. And the stress factor. Now let's talk about this, because with the telomeres, what they're discovering with all the, millions of dollars that was spent, yes, on research, is to find out the impact of stress on these telomeres.
Yeah, and that there's an inflammatory pathway that's activated by stress, which is countered by the parasympathetic system. If we activate the parasympathetic, that reduces inflammation, and the parasympathetic is activated by meditation and positive cognition and I think love and gratitude. Certainly a lot of studies have come through that love and gratitude have impacts on our biology. And, this is the nitty gritty that some are definitely more expert on than I am, but, it's like you get the big picture of what's going on, and certainly a lot of what the ancients and the mystics throughout time have said will keep you healthy. Things like meditation and positive cognition, love and gratitude are coming through quite strongly with these studies now as being important. And altruism is another one too, being open to your community and to give to others and so on, so that what I call the dance of the one and the one, that you are one, but you are also part of the bigger one. And to get that balance, dancing together and not being too far one way or the other, I think the mortal pathway has led us either to be martyrs and give too much to everybody else, or to go the other way and be like almost selfish and give too much to our small self. So it seems to me that the indefinite life extension and physical immortality path is to have a dance between those, so that we find the balance there, so that we don't sacrifice ourselves, but we don't also not give at all to others and community.
Well, and that's the thing. That's part of the key. As you said, why meditation and all of these practices have such an impact. We're talking about balance. We're talking about finding that centered space. We're also looking at the impact that these tools, these practices have on the brain. I mean, so we can definitely tie together, I would say, why it would have such an incredible impact on how we age, if you age drastically or not. So I think we can definitely see that. And I love, there's a statement that you made in your book. It says, just because human beings have always died does not mean that they always will die. And I think that's very important, because we see technology and we see the changes that are constantly happening.
Yeah, that was actually a quote, but I can't quite remember who I quoted. but yeah,
it's a good quote.
Just because something has always been the way doesn't mean that it will continue to be the way. And we've seen that so many times, the flat earth to the round earth, the thing that, humanity couldn't fly in a flying machine and now we can. So over and over we keep doing things that we were thought to be impossible. This is no different. It's just people need to start to really lift that filter of perception and just at the very minimum start to say, well, perhaps it is possible, and perhaps it is possible for me. That's the other thing, because as you make that statement for yourself, all sorts of different creative thoughts and ideas come in, and you start to see life differently and you start to create life differently. So if somebody was, reaching that time of their, they've been here about 60 years. So the old way was to think, oh, well, I'll retire from work and then I might have a few years of playtime and then I'll just allow my body to run down and leave the planet. So they can really fully question that now and say, well, do I really want to do that? And, we already see there's lots of people out there that are living very healthy lives for a lot longer than they did 50 years ago. So there's already a template there for people to own this healthy longevity and say, yeah, I'm going to live and I'm going to live well and I'm going to do what, I always wanted to do. I might even retrain in something. And the other beauty of this philosophy is to do it in your own time. It's not, it's an eternal thing, so it's a relaxing thing. The time factor that's so caught up in mortality actually causes part of the stress. That always running out of time thing, haven't got enough time, that's part of the big stresses of the mortal pathway. So as you lift the lid and start to relax and say, well, I want to do a degree in geography, but I don't have to do it in 4 years. I can take 12 years or 15 years if I want. Things like this, just relax into it. Enjoy it. Enjoy learning. Enjoy travel, enjoy seeing all this miraculous creativity. That's the other thing that astounds me. How creative humanity has been already, Europe and places like that. And people back then, a few hundred years ago, they were lucky to get 30 or 40 years on Earth before they died, and yet they were incredibly creative. Their art and their architecture, just amazing. There's so much for us to explore on planet Earth. And that's just the human constructions, let alone all of nature is so extraordinary. I mean, I'll be entertained here for hundreds of years, for sure, if it unfolds that way for me. Will have no shortage of things to enjoy.
Absolutely. There is so much to do. And yes, when you look at studies in terms of seniors, because they've shown studies in terms of seniors and being active and brain growth because they're engaging in learning new things. So science is actually showing, even on that scale, that seniors that are active in learning new things are actually having longer, and healthier lives. So that's evident.
Yeah, that's right. And we need to talk about the MRI scans. That's really exciting. That's coming through from neuroscience now. They're doing MRI scans on people with mindfulness meditation practices. There was actually an Australian program, Catalyst, Australian Broadcasting Commission program that was done a year or so ago. And they talked a lot about meditation in that. It was a really good program. And the interviewer, he had never done mindfulness meditation, but he started to learn it, and he had an MRI scan done at the start of his time, and then 8 weeks later it was repeated. And yeah, there was some quite amazing changes in his brain in just 8 weeks. And I'm pretty sure there was one part of his brain that increased in neurons about 20% just in 8 weeks.
That's tremendous.
Yeah, and that's, that's just a one-off person, obviously, but that's been confirmed in many, many studies of meditation. And other activities too. Anything that people learn is going to alter their brains, and that's picked up in the MRI scan.
Right. And we're talking about, brain plasticity. We're talking about just how pliable and how plastic, how pliable we are, the brain is, just the entire human experience. Let me let the audience know, or remind them who we're chatting with and where we're coming from as well. We're coming to you from KPFK 90.7 FM in Southern California, 98.7 in Santa Barbara, 93.7 in San Diego, 99.5 in Ridgecrest and China Lake, and streaming live on the World Wide Web at kpfk.org. You're, of course, listening to The Expansion Zone with Sonia Barrett, and of course, that would be me. And my guest today is Dr. Janni Lloyd. And we're having an interesting conversation about the possibility of immortality, human beings living basically timelessly. So this has been a fascinating conversation. And of course, to think of epigenetics and to realize that people have so much more control over what happens with their bodies, that they don't have to have a disease because their, father or mother or grandmother or grandfather had it, that they don't have to do that. And I think some people are, they're still not exposed to that information as yet.
Yeah, and there's some amazing YouTube clips about that. And they've done studies on twins, identical twins, that have been raised in different environments. And that's quite astounding to see how their disease profiles and their health are quite markedly different quite often. So there's a lot out there for people to investigate and research. And I think this is a time where it's really important for people to start to take control of their own health. And there is so much information available to people now that they can investigate their health and look at what works for them, and they can use their health professionals as a team and not necessarily expecting them to know everything, because it's almost impossible for the doctor to keep up with everything now. It is coming through so rapidly. And also the other thing you have to understand about the medical profession is that they are schooled in their paradigm. They are generally not schooled in looking beyond the finite barrier at this time. So you cannot go to them and expect a different approach a lot of the time. But that said, there is a lot more doctors who are doing integrative medicine now. So they are looking more holistically. So, that's where the person has to make their own decisions about their health professionals, and they can, use the holistic people as well. But even some of the holistic people have not lifted the lid on the belief system physical death is inevitable. So they're still living in a finite potential. So that's the other thing they have to keep in mind. Start taking 100% responsibility for your own health and use those around you as a team, but also be aware that depending on what their filter of perception is, they can only come from that. And I liken it to, if you wanted to speak English, but you went to a teacher who spoke only Chinese, you can't expect English from somebody who speaks only Chinese. So you either have to find somebody who speaks Chinese and English, or somebody who speaks English and, you know what I'm saying with that analogy there? You have to be careful that the paradigm that you're accessing can give you what you are asking for, or take only from that paradigm the wisdom that they are able to give you.
That's very important. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's very important because, yes, you are correct. There are a great many people, I won't say a small few, but there are quite a few people who are in the holistic health arena who have still not yet arrived at this this level of expansion in terms of longevity and the possibility of people living just timelessly. So they are going to, I'm sure they're going to provide for that individual according to where their own belief system is as well. So,
yeah.
Important. Yeah.
And that brings up the number game. I like to call it the number game, that, depending on how many years we've been on planet Earth, sometimes you will get different thoughts and opinions from those around you, dependent on where you are in the game. So if you were to develop some sort of illness and you'd only been here 30 years, everybody would be very, very wanting you to stay here, and they'd be doing everything possible, and you'd be going, probably be encouraged to go to every healer that you could imagine. However, when somebody has been here 80 years and they develop the same difficulty, there's often a sense of acceptance with those around and the person themselves that, oh, well, I've done my time and, there's nothing out there for me. So let's make it as easy as possible and just palliative care and things like that. So that's where, again, that I call it the petri dish that we're sort of immersed in. The cell, if you put it in the petri dish, if you alter the nutrients of the petri dish and in the environment, it affects the cell's health. Well, we are immersed in a petri dish of our community and our society. And so depending on the beliefs and potentials that have been explored by those who are closest to you, you will be affected by what their beliefs and thoughts and potentials are. So it's sort of like it's a time where we really, if we want to live here for a lot longer healthily, we really have to take hold of it and take 100% responsibility for it ourselves at this time, because although we see evidence that the society is expanding, and particularly science coming through, it's still in its infancy and we need to grab hold of it. And the more that we own it for ourselves, the more we expand it in our community as well. And that's one of the reasons I love to do what I'm doing, because I'm helping it to expand. And to me, that's the ultimate in health, is to bring in this philosophy and lift the lid on that inevitability, because it's a very heavy way to be in the world. And you can see it coming in on people. Even sometimes if they've only been here 20 or 30 years, they'll start to say, oh, I must be getting old. And they start to tailor their life almost towards that inevitable death. And it's quite a heavy thing.
Yes, it's a very huge program. It is just like a virus. I just like to call it like a virus. And also, it's something to keep in mind, as Dr. Clotilde Rapai says, who wrote The Culture Code. He said that science is completely dependent on the collective, on human beings and what they can accept as a possibility. And I think that it should, to some degree, be the other way around. But I think what we need to realize, as you were saying, Janni, is that what we believe in as a collective really strengthens, what the journey we will take as a collective. And individuals like yourself or myself, or people who are going out there and giving this other side of the coin, begins to create that kind of change.
Yeah. And, we have been given this for a reason. We happen to be early pioneers. And I think it's the alchemists call it the great work. And I think it has been unfolding for millennia. I feel that there have been people that have awoken to this thousands of years ago. And some of those people would have only awoken to it and not been able to live it themselves. However, I think some of them will have opened to it and been able to walk it to completion, and maybe still here somewhere on Earth, and, certainly left messages which have probably been distorted by the death consciousness thing. People like Lao Tzu and Jesus and so on, I feel that they left their message. But of course, back then, it wasn't time for humanity. Humanity was not ready to play a new game. However, I think that humanity, and we see the evidence around us that humanity is ready to evolve to the new game. So that's another reason why we as pioneers are now choosing to speak out more, and to not, just go off to the Himalayas and retreat from society. So, and it's also interesting too, because I've read a few scientific books in the last few years too that look at the history throughout science of some of these people that awoke to this potential as well. I think it was Francis Bacon. He was a Cambridge University graduate, and he was all about this potential that humanity would in time learn how to be ongoingly healthy and achieve immortality. So some of his works and words are really interesting, but they also have to work where their community is at that time. And I thought it was really interesting that Francis Bacon, in this quote that I read, was encouraging doctors to actually physically examine their patients, to actually lay their hands on their patients and feel their organs. And I thought, my goodness, weren't they doing that back then? So we can always see that there's things that we've been learning along the way that have assisted us in this awakening. And I thought, whoa, so doctors tried to actually treat their patients without actually examining them physically? My goodness. So you can see there's been this evolution going on.
Absolutely.
And
moving into the new normal.
And these people that awake to this potential seem to be usually able to bring in quite new, quite a lot of innovation for whatever is happening in their world around them. But, they don't always actually achieve it for themselves. And that's the thing, you and I, we don't know for sure whether we're still going to be here in a few hundred years, but we're going to enjoy the journey and do our best.
Right. Be part of expansive thought, expansive awareness.
And just dance in the now, because really, ultimately, that's all we have is the now.
That's all we have is the now. And that's where all the science about this is really tied up, but that's a whole other show. But you also mentioned, is it Damien Broderick, his book, The Last Mortal Generation?
Yeah.
And yes, this was a quote. You had a quote here from him. Sometime during the 21st century, ordinary humans like you and me, or our children or grandchildren, will be offered new medical treatments that will lead eventually to physical immortality. Science and technology, to be more precise, will provide the option of indefinitely extending youthfulness. So there is a whole lot here in the sense of other people who are coming out and seeing this. And you also mentioned Ben Bova. His book is called Immortality. And he begins his book, as you said, by saying the first immortal human beings are probably living among us today. You might be one of them. And I've heard this by, who is it, Aubrey Gray?
Aubrey de Grey, yes.
De Grey, yes. He has said that for a long time. And I believe that. I agree with what you said just a few moments ago, that who knows, some of these people who managed to discover this and managed to actually be living it are probably living right here on the planet. So I think there's a lot of things that we are just probably not privy to because of, conditioning and belief system. Yeah,
and the interesting thing is that a lot of the medical science is still based in matter-based Newtonian physics. And Aubrey de Grey talks about how we can, treat our body like a vintage car, and that, we can have, organ replacements and things like that, which I think is a starting point for looking at this potential. At least it takes the blinkers off of what might be possible. And, some people are and have already needed some of these things. So there's no judgment. There's no, this is the right way and that's the wrong way. Each person will find their own way in this. There's people in genetic engineering that are doing interesting work. There's the BioViva company, Liz Parrish, has been patient zero in a telomere gene therapy that seems to be causing some interesting improvements in her cells. And the other thing I think too is that a person that takes a gene therapy like that really wants to be here. To be patient zero in an experimental procedure, you have to really believe in this potential and really be choosing to stay here for hundreds of years. So I think that's the other thing that happens. I don't think it's just the treatment. I think it's the psychology that goes with it too. It's quite a big commitment to make.
Right, because ultimately, as I said in the very beginning of the show, is that ultimately most people want to live. Life is an incredibly precious experience to many people. It's just that well, most people obviously just can't figure out how to make it last longer and maintain their youthfulness. Now, there's a couple things I'd like to mention. One is that we're moving into this age of stem cells, allowing the growing of new teeth. This is something that is definitely coming up. We're seeing that more, and as a matter of fact, they are doing this. They are working with this. There's evidence that that this works. I forgot the doctor's name, but this is something else that we can look at. That's saying what the body is able to do. Are you familiar?
Yes. And that's really, I think, one of the, especially for Western culture, because our teeth seem to be one of the areas that we have problems with fairly early, or had. In new generations, there's a lot of different abilities out there. They're born into a different vibration, a lot of them, and their teeth aren't decaying like people of the baby boomer generation did. So it's very interesting, but stem cell teeth, I think, really interesting. And they're already doing things like assisting the bone jaw regrowth with stem cells to enable the bone or the jaw to accept ceramic implants. So there's really interesting things going on. And it's like a dentist I was speaking to recently said that he had come back from a stem cell conference, and he said all the dentists there from around the world, he said it felt like a meeting of the United Nations, and all the researchers and the dentists. And isn't that exciting that we're now collaborating and meeting cooperatively to put all our energy into health and joy and peace? And that in itself is just so wonderful. This is a wonderful time that's unfolding.
Oh, absolutely. I think you can feel blessed to be here at this time. And we can see that there has to be something very special about this time when we examine all of the, expansion in technology. Yes, we're talking about there is nanotechnology and all of that. But like you said, everything has its place, and it's all part of showing us or helping people to expand their minds. We're talking, of course, about the body's ability to do all of these things, without necessarily a machine. No right or wrong about it, but we're just saying that the body is capable of recycling itself, basically.
Yeah, and that's my preferred pathway. Because it's less invasive, it's it's just gentler in general. So that's definitely my preferred pathway and the one I like to focus on. But that's not to discount that these other people are doing amazing things as well, and also helping to lift that filter of perception, which is of benefit for all of us. And the other thing to look at is the multidimensional reality that you can touch on when you meditate. And it's not to say that my feeling is that our spiritual self is immortal already. So all that we're doing is bringing the body into alignment with that. So it doesn't take away the multidimensional experience. And I feel as, for myself, as hopefully I'm here for hundreds of years and increase the synchrony of my mind, body, spirit experience, that in time I may learn to be able to teleport between dimensions. So any of these multidimensional realities that people feel that they would like to experience after death, I feel you can actually in time attain them as an immortal, that you don't have to make a choice around that it's still going to be available, just accessed in a different way. Does that make sense, Sonia?
Oh, absolutely. That's my work. That's what my work is about. But yes, absolutely. That's very, very important, because that leads into this next question, which is, people are saying, well, I don't want to live that long. Why would I want to live that long? And overpopulation. So we hear things based on programming, really, based on the information that has been continuously fed to people. So they can't really see why they would want to live that long, particularly because they expect the body is going to be in a broken down state. So there are all these beliefs and images that are there. What would you say to that if somebody brings up these questions?
Yeah. Once again, it's a vast subject and it's often difficult to know where to start.
I know.
However, the first thing is to get them to start to look at their life creatively. Like I say to them, okay, well, let's for a moment just imagine, and you get them deep breathing and meditating, imagine that you could live forever. So forget about all the things that you think are practical reasons why you can't. So just breathe into that potential. What would it be like to be able to live for as long as you choose? What would you create? So that's an attempt to activate their inner child and get them excited about life again. And then, they might say, I've always wanted to travel to Indonesia or America, so I'd do that first. And then, I've always wanted to learn the piano, so yeah, I might do that. And the other thing you have to also bring in, they always want to bring, the practical mind always wants to bring in, how can we do it with, money? The money's got to be there. So the first thing I do before the meditation is I say, okay, you've won lotto and you have won $10 million and you have invested it wisely. So it's going to last for a long, long, long time, hundreds and hundreds of years. So forget about that practical aspect as well. Because really we can't know exactly how all this is going to unfold. All we can do is trust life as we've always trusted it from the moment we were born, that somehow or other it's all unfolded for us, that we've been provided for. So that's a good place to start, to get them being a little bit creative and excited. And then to really address the practical issues. There's a wonderful book called Abundance. It's been written by Peter Diamandis, and he looks at this wonderfully, all the potentials that are becoming available. And we don't really have a population problem. There's a statistic that was calculated recently that if we lived at the population density of Macau or Monaco, who are the most densely populated, but they have good healthy longevity, and they're also very affluent. And if we all lived at that population density, we could fit into the country of Germany, which is not very big. So that's quite extraordinary when you think about that. Now, I don't necessarily want to live at the population density of Macau or Monaco, but that's saying we don't really have a space issue. If we bring water to the deserts, that opens them up. There's talk of maybe creating pylons into the ocean and creating cities over the ocean. There's no, more and more vertical living, and in time, perhaps colonization of a planet in space. So there are many, many creative options. I really don't think you put off your own immortality because you think you're going to take space from somebody else. And all sorts of things, like even the move to vegetarianism and veganism is causing the thought that a lot of the land that's used for beef cattle and animals won't be required. So that will open up a lot of extra land for all sorts of things. There's vertical farming, growing plants in, vertical buildings. So there's no shortage of creative ideas for how this is all going to unfold.
Well, the thing is, too, is that people are assessing all of the future based on their current belief and understanding. That this, to me, is the really big part of it. So it's a little bit more difficult, I think, for just people to maybe see some of these other possibilities because you don't know what they are until you are in a different space of being. I think that gradually, as you said, starts opening up whatever those possibilities are. So I think people have to keep that in mind. And then you brought up the multidimensional aspect. There's so much that is possible for the body and for the human being. But first, we have to begin to step into some of these ideas that we've been talking about today.
Yeah, and I think that you and I and others are bridge builders. So we've had various epiphanies, and that creates a gap between our programming and, the epiphany that we've had. And we create bridges that make it easier for other people to walk over one step at a time and actually start to perceive what we perceived in, like a moment. So that's another thing that the pioneers do. They actually create bridges that make it easier for others. And also a lot of people say, the medical interventions will cost a lot of money, but they will perhaps initially, but not for long. And there's all sorts of graphs that show that any new, technological innovation or whatever, it costs a lot initially, but then it becomes available for everybody. So, all of those things, if somebody is interested, they will find the answers and the creative potentials. If somebody is not interested, in some ways, it's better to not waste your breath. Because
Absolutely.
They're just not ready, and that's fine. There is no right or wrong in this. It's everybody's choice. It's not compulsory, and everybody has the choice to do. There's nothing wrong with death if they choose that. That's fine, it's just a matter of another choice. A bit like the automobile and the horse and cart. And there are people in the world that still use the horse and cart, and that's perfectly fine. And I think that's the other thing that's happening with humanity. The compassion level is going right up, and we're opening our hearts to everybody and everybody's uniqueness, and we're not making people wrong for being so-called different. We're just allowing more and more space for people to be who they are and what they are and their own choices, as long as it's friendly and peaceful. And that's really lovely. And the other thing we need to be careful of with this immortality and agelessness concept is that we don't become in any way age discriminatory. And I think, that probably is more to do with mortality. I think people become frightened of people who look older or behave older because they think the next step is death. And I think a lot of the fear around death and the denial around death actually creates age discrimination because this is about being open to everybody, and everybody has the ability to renew and be loved and integrated and included. And that's what I love too about Harvard psychologist Ellen Langer's study, the counterclockwise study that she did, where she took those men in their 70s that were dependent on family. This was back in the 1970s, because a lot of people in their 70s are not dependent on family now. It's almost like they were like the 50-year-olds of previous times. So, but anyway, this study she did in 1979, she took them on retreat and returned them to 1959 so that all that they could talk about and relate to each other was as they were in 1959. And she did a whole range of biological tests before that week where they went back to 1959 and then after, and there was statistical difference in everything. And they actually used in that week.
We have about 2 minutes left.
Yeah, right.
But I wanted to make sure that you do let us know about your Facebook group and also your website and any place that people can connect with you.
Yeah, if they just Google Janni Lloyd, JANNI LLOYD, they will find lots of avenues to access my work. My books are at lulu.com. I have a personal Facebook page, and I do have some groups there that they can choose to become a member of if they like. But basically my work is there for everybody to see as long as they Google the name, and they'll find me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You want to check out the Facebook group because there's so many wonderful people there that are expressing some of these ideas and are in support of that. And it's just sort of this wonderful community that you have put together, that you've created, and people keep more people keep being added to it. So I think that is just wonderful. That's awesome.
Yeah, and the thing that I really love about that is that they come from every different wisdom stream you can imagine. You know, it's a really a meeting point of people that have looked at it from so many different perspectives and respectfully with each other.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being on the show, and I look forward to chatting with you again, Janni. Now, to the listening audience, we are at the end of our show, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to our engineer as well, D'Angelo Jones. Please also visit us on the website at theexpansionzone.com. Sign up for our newsletter, listen to the replay of the show in the archives, and also visit our Facebook page at The Expansion Zone, Facebook Expansion Zone, and Twitter. And of course, my regular website, therealsoniabarrett.com. As always, I like to remind you to live life to its fullest and question everything. Until next time, see you then.